This is an LACTO Forum production.
Hello and welcome to Exception Handlers, the podcast where CTOs debug the challenges that keep us up at night. I'm Alex.
And I'm Bill.
And on today's episode, we are delighted to have with us Dave Gullo, who is a serial entrepreneur and currently the founder of ooda Video. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So we want to talk to you about a topic that I think a lot of people are very curious about, but not a ton of people have a lot of expertise in, and you actually do. And that topic is AI-aided solo or very small team entrepreneurship. And so before we get into it, do you want to give our listeners a little bit of a background on you and what you've done in this area?
So ooda Video is company 6. Basically, this one I started out on first principles of, AI first to everything. And you see sort of this later mover advantage with companies that are starting now versus, say, 3 or 5 or more years ago. So, the idea is kind of keeping with the natural language phenomenon we see. So it's a natural language video compositor and mixer. So that's what we're doing with ooda Video.
Awesome. Well, let's get into it. So I guess the first topic we really want to explore is getting started as a solo and really leveraging AI to its maximum ability to start and run a company. And so I guess, just to get into it, when you start off building a company that is really kind of AI-aided and you're by yourself, what are you focusing on initially? Are you focusing on the product, figuring out your AI assistants? What does that look like? How do you get going?
Well, yeah, I guess the pre-starting part of it is a really long phase of proving out. Okay, so I would say think of it as a very long bootstrap, and that can run concurrently with other things in your life, because kind of characteristically, the path a lot of startups go is you raise money. Well, it's idea, team, execution, traction, and you end up going along this curve and so forth. I think in modern times, it's easier to sort of develop more cautiously and before you necessarily raise money, and making sure that sort of lean startup, if you will, that product market fit exists. And so to me, it's like really delightful to be able to make a lot of experimentation these days with AI first engineering, agentic engineering, et cetera, where you can try something and throw it away. And that's the cost function to that's, a lot less. I think other first principles there that really matter is you can go a lot longer without fundraising necessarily. And you see solopreneurs or small, 2-person founder teams going quite a long distance without having to raise. And or by the time they raise, it's a lot more de-risked. And therefore, they can raise on different terms, often their own terms. It's closer to something like a growth round than hey, maybe this might be something, right?
Well, I actually think raising, and we should definitely get into it, is a whole other fascinating topic around this world that we're in. But just to kind of pare it back what I'm hearing, so the basics of starting a business aren't necessarily changing. You still need to have an idea, you need to iterate, you need to figure out what's what before you kind of get into it. But to your point, you could do a lot more at bats because of AI. You can figure it out a lot more intensely, if you will, before you actually get into it. But let's pretend you have that fit, you have an idea. Like in the case of the company you've co-founded or founded recently. So at that point, what does it look like to kind of bring your AI team together? You're thinking about both product, but there's also marketing, and there's also financing, and there's also perhaps legal considerations and all terms of service, you name it, right? There's a whole, what does that look like if you're on your own, you and a bunch of robots going at it?
Yeah, right. So I look at it, well, let me go in reverse order, because sure. The legal, some of those things are kind of late bound in the process. So they come into fruition closer to the first deals that are coming together. And in fact, a number of them are all landing at the same time. So the need for hardening license agreements and these kind of things, luckily that's easy to do. It's kind of a solved problem. I think some of the rest of my answer may not be characteristic of what other people might say, but I'm just going to go for it. And let me give you the analogy of talent and hiring and what AI has done to that in HR.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a bunch of really talented people automating agents to apply to 1,000 jobs a day, customizing their CV, et cetera, right? And that creates its own sort of deluge slop. And then on the receiving end, you have HR managers and hirers that need to deal with that. And so whole products have sprung up to deal with the problem. Point being, I get marketed to every day in more and more creepy ways. People who've like crawled Discords and GitHubs, and they know the deep, intimate details of me. And that's kind of off-putting. And so I'm not looking to just use more and more and more tech to just go get that next customer. I've gone the other direction, and I would do this with talent as well, where it's all relationship based. So of my first 5, POCs I'm chasing, some of which are at various stages of procurement and other stuff, it's all through relationships that are 20, 30 years old. People I've known for a long time, happen to work in key places. I know not everybody can do that, but factor that how you will, whether it's finding people or other things. I just get too much inbounds all the time to the point where I've completely turned it off. When that time comes, I'm sure I'll eat those words when it comes to scaling. But at least in what I'm doing, the dollar per customer is so high. It's like you don't need a broad, it's not a consumer-based play. It's something more commercial in nature.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. So and by the way, totally makes sense. I think I've heard Sam Altman say something along those lines once, that like if you really want to make a difference and grow business that actually scales, like marketing, especially the AI-driven marketing, is probably the last thing you want to be doing. But that's fair. The other thing about this that's interesting to me is in terms of a skill set, right? So traditionally, your founder kind of has to, broad knowledge and one area of deep expertise, and maybe a co-founder kind of complements your expertise, and that's how you get going. Is that still the profile you need in this AI world, or are you kind of jack of all trades, master of none, because AI will fill in the depth gaps for you? Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I will say I miss sometimes the sounding board that past co-founders have given me, and I really appreciate them. But at the same time, I will say like sort of how product and engineering are melding like this. So you have product people becoming engineers and engineers becoming better product people. And depending on where you're at on the curve, hopefully you're getting closer to spec-driven development or something beyond that, where it's at least personally forced me to become a lot better product person. And in some ways to go slow to go fast. And so I will say, like most of the time, there's like this anxiety to token max, right? And spin all these plates and try and go as fast. But that kind of leads to AI brain fry, and fatigue, which is a whole nother topic we could put a pin in for right now. But the point is, I think the skill sets are merging, and I'm seeing that in the work I'm doing. I was an okay front ender and designer. I kind of know when I see it. And if you know what models to use, particularly the Anthropic ones, they design so darn well. It's really easy to be that jack of all trades, but you really need a strong aesthetic, basically, and a strong opinion about products and strong vocabulary to specify it all.
So you bring up a very interesting point, and that is bouncing things off of others. What do you use for your muse? What is where are your inspirations coming from? Solely internally? Are you trying to leverage AI for that as well? Do you just take it to people outside the organization? And the sounding boards, what do they look like?
Yeah, I'd say it's a mixture of all of the above. Certainly that close dialogue with the close contacts at companies is helpful, and being politely persistent, just pinging maybe monthly or maybe a little more. Certainly AI and a lot of different ones. I think where I've gotten more hooked is hooking up Telegram agents and running things like Clawbot or Hermes agent and tuning them to be founder-like and letting them have a longer-term memory and figure out my TAM and figure out things. And so, admittedly, it's AI, but not just a single session kind of turn by turn, but like keeping persistent memory and working off things like when I'm stuck on a flight or on a train or some other place,
Yeah, and that makes sense. The only thing that I have found is that the AIs tend to be quite accommodating.
Yeah.
And some of my best work has come from somebody saying, "That's a dumb idea. What are you thinking? You should be doing this." And it was something I hadn't thought about.
No, that's good. And you can get them to compete and, challenge you. And I see some of my friends far better than me with agentic engineering do that even when they're writing code, and to have it take a concurrent, parallel, or contradictory view. And if you don't do it in real time, you get it in the code review phase. But yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, you're right. The sycophantic nature can really be a detriment. So yeah, I mean, I talk to friends too.
I guess the question is, have you found a prompt yet that forces Claude to not be so, oh my God, that's a good idea?
No.
Yeah.
Or to be antagonistic on purpose so that you really are forced to think about what you're doing.
Yeah. I think they call it, in code reviews, they think that there's like this whole adversarial code review thing where the agent specifically instructed to find everything possibly that's wrong. Actually, before we move on of this getting started topic, I actually do want to dive into fundraising because I think it's fascinating. So the way I kind of see this world, and I would love to hear how you think about it, is it seems like we're in this weird transition state where you could still fundraise as if you're going to hire and scale like you used to. You have to hire a team to get anything done, and that implies certain dollars that come along with it, but you don't actually have to. And I don't think this is going to be forever, by the way. I think at some point that's going to catch up. But how do you see that? Like in terms of how much money do you need to get started? How much fundraising do you need to do to get going? Are people less willing to give you a bunch up front because they know you're using AI? How do you see that whole world?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting challenge in the one sense, because AI is accelerating things so much. We don't know what things look like in 3 years from now or 5 years from now. And so that traditional ride or die to $1 billion, like what investors want to see is a TAM that gets you to $1 billion or deca-billion-dollar evaluation, right? And then the rest of their portfolio just dies, and you're like going to be the 1 or 3% that returns the fund. So like that's difficult because you have to have something extremely convincing, and you should if you're raising money. But I think there's a new hybrid approach where you don't have to ride or die to $1 billion. Because, well, actually, even with some of the laws, as of last summer, they changed some of the laws for founders like USPS, and they made it pay off to flip a company in just 2 or 3 years instead of 5. That's one interesting thing. That's just taxes, though. But think of like the useful life of tech is nominally approaching who knows what, 0 or something close to it, versus the useful life being a decade or so, taking a decade to exit companies or more. So like I think with smaller solopreneurs, multi-founders with small staff, you see the ability to generate huge value with very little burn. And, someone once told me only a fool ever starts a company without an exit strategy. And so if you are exiting rather than IPOing or just living off cash your whole life, the potential to make huge value in short amounts of time, like kind of changes up that whole game. And I know I keep going back to the not fundraising thing, but that's what you have on your side if you've got a fairly good idea and you've already got cash flow. Like if you don't, maybe you shouldn't be raising anyways. But yeah.
Well, assuming for a second that we do take the path to the VC land for a moment here, it seems to me that when you have a solopreneur, what the VCs like to call the moat is something that is often more difficult to define unless you have some sort of unique access to a person or some sort of resource that nobody else has, because in their minds, anybody can build whatever you're doing in a weekend.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think the best moats right now are data and reinforcement. So RL for validation of something. And usually that person has some subject matter expertise, a secret sauce for data and validating data and tuning models or tuning processes to get there bigger, better, faster than other people. But you're right. And in the end of the day, we're pretty much all using the same open source stacks usually. So you are right. That moat's getting harder to defend as software just all becomes weights, right? Like all your weights are belong to us is where we're heading with software, right?
Yeah.
So,
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
so I think this is actually a really good point to transition from. So we've started, we got going, we've got some traction. Now the hard part comes in. How do you scale? And I think what makes it especially interesting with AI and kind of solo entrepreneurship using AI, I mean, there's a bunch of things. But for example, so, you know, how much pride should you take in not having to hire a lot of people? Is it like I'm solo until the end, or does it at some point become like a vanity metric where you're actually starving the business of potential because you're just asking AI to do stuff that humans should be really doing at better quality? There's the whole idea of like, when you have 50 agents doing different parts of the business, are you really a solo, or are you just managing a bunch of unstable, hallucinating employees? Right. So there's like a lot of interesting aspects to scaling this whole thing. But how do you think about that?
Well, fortunately, I haven't gotten to that level yet to need to put 50 agents potentially hallucinating, because going back to the brain drain and the sheer fatigue we get, like spinning 12 plates all going Mach 7. I mean, I can only imagine. So really there is a scaling of point people all along the way. So some of the other companies I see chasing this have like a small intervalence of like 5 people. And it's like a Ocean's 11 of those 5 people all doing very particular things. And you just like don't fan out like 2 extra or 3 extra valencies or whatever from that. So that's how I would see as a person scaling myself. And quite frankly, I'm willing to defer the engineering piece even before you might think, just in terms of getting that second person, that second opinion you're talking about earlier. But yeah, like it's a very good question. I think it's an uptown problem, because by the time you are at that scale, it's not just a vanity thing. You will be hiring folks, EAs, people to cover marketing, finance, etc. So, but just not a whole bunch, right?
Probably the thing that gives mostly is redundancy, right? So if in the past you're like, well, I have to hire a team of 4 engineers because that's what it takes to build anything. But also I'm getting built in. If one's out, the other can cover. Now you're like, I'm going to hire my 1 engineer to help me out because that's all I really need, because them plus AI could do the job. But you're missing that layer of redundancy in the business, and that probably cuts across all kinds of verticals.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point, and it kind of cuts into this newer idea, or this re-emergent idea of provenance. So like you could do all that stuff, and yet there's a lot of knowledge in the head of that engineer, and you could look at a code base, for example, and be like, "This is great, but where did it all come from? Was this a client request? Was like what? Where did all of this come from?
Yeah.
And how could we ever rebuild it? Or perish the thought, that bus factor thing where they're not with us anymore. How do you take up that work stream without kind of knowing how it all came together?" And I think there's some interesting folks tackling that problem, giving provenance to all kinds of bits of data so you can go backport it when necessary or rederive it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the other thing I wanted to just kind of double click into around this whole scaling thing is, the idea of kind of a photocopy of a photocopy eventually just becomes crappier and crappier. And that's kind of what you end up seeing with AI doing everything. Not only do you get slop, but you get progressively crappier slop. So really the question there is, how do you scale your taste? Because that probably is what differentiates slop from AI made it, but it's actually pretty good because I looked at it and I was like, yeah, this makes sense. This sounds right. This looks correct. How do you scale taste as you scale? What does that look like if you have, if you're relying heavily on agents to scale, I guess is really the framing here.
Yeah, it's a really good question, because you have taste in a couple levels. Let's just take the engineering angle, just because I'm not doing the marketing part, which would also definitely require it. But on the one hand, you have everything on the front, everything people are going to see. And I'd say I put some of the most effort into that very meticulously, and to the point where I may use a lot of other coding tools, a lot of harnesses. But when it comes to like really getting nitpicky on the UI, I'll use Cursor and I'll use very specific models, etc. And actually slow down and sometimes get to the point where I'm actually going in and just editing code when I get impatient, right? I still do that, even though it's 1 to 5% of the time at best. I think there's the other level with being disciplined about the code reviews and using the right code reviewing strategies. And I know it's kind of intoxicating, the level of sort of productivity you get and wanting to go for the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And you can sort of get punch drunk on it. And I think I've been kind of lucky for a while not getting bit by it, but I did recently get horribly bit by this. I wanted to derive a new model. And so over the weekend, I'm like, basically it's the kind of video vision model that will trace perfect, like, polygons around you as you move or whatever you're detecting. And I'm like, cool, we're going to get this going. And I put it in and I had to like do something. I came back the next weekend to build the visual renderer for it. And it's a stick man that's like just sitting there. And I'm like, what the? And it looks so perfect. It was spitting out data. I didn't have a renderer for it quite yet. But the point was, I was kind of almost cocky about how easy it was because I would have spent easily a month or 3 weeks deriving all of this back in the day, right? It's very laborious to build these things. Now they're coming together in a couple hours or less. And so that's humbling. But I think it's like go slow to go fast, and definitely put the time into setting up really tight code review. And I guess the other thing I could have learned there is codifying a little bit more of that lesson into some kind of longer term memory. I'm a little hesitant to use certain coding agents with really, really, really long term memory because they're so darn slow, but they're good. So there's that trade off. But it's like kind of like when you think back, like how could we have avoided this? It's like spend a bunch more time and tokens and that kind of thing and more process, or just expect to do fewer features at a time. Yeah, that's where I came away with from that. Yeah.
So the one term I didn't hear in that was QA, and I don't mean that facetiously. It is the siren song of going as fast as we can, and I'm totally guilty of this as well. But it's the belief that with code review we can kind of skip the QA part. And what I'm finding is it's almost like bumper cars now, that we go until we smash into something. We go, whoops, we should have probably checked that differently because the code was logical, but there was something wrong about the assumptions or the input data or whatever it was, but it led to the wrong result.
Yeah, Bill, that's a great point. And I will say this. I watched all the artifacts go by. I looked at the diffs. I previewed it all. And I'm like, look at that. Look at those great tests. Like it did have a lot of built-in everything. All the boxes were checked for me based off of a certain amount of skills and expectations I had. But you're right. Like I didn't like the UAT really finishes it all off. And that was the one step I did not do. And yeah, fair enough. I mean,
we replaced UAT with WAT.
Yeah.
There is an interesting thing there, though, where it's like, and obviously, when you have a production app with a bunch of users, this is not a great strategy. But when you're kind of building initially, there is something to be said for just letting it do its thing, getting as far as it can, and just slamming headfirst against the problem that you can then very quickly iterate. I mean, part of this is the risk and cost of introducing problems. If it's low, then your UAT and your production deployment are the same thing, and you just quickly iterate and fix it, right? But again, like the risk profile changes depending on what the blast radius of that could be if it's out.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. While we're talking about scaling, right? There's another actually really interesting concept I've seen crop up really lately, which kind of deals with customization. So imagine customers all need just slightly something different from your product. And actually that's the bane of a lot of things. Like if you look at, I don't know, Salesforce, like they have like 1,000 different, features, but really everybody only uses mostly the core. And then there's this really long tail of every different connector and feature and thing. And over time, they've like come to evolve to like sort of, deliver those things, but like bound into their system with interfaces and APIs and sort of the old school way of doing it. And I'm seeing with some of my future customers, they want specific customizations that are only for them. And this concept I've heard out there is the idea of like a live patch that sort of lives along the side of your core code base. And so in terms of like back in the day, in order to scale that kind of thing, you'd need a lot more decision making and architecture and a whole bunch of just tests and other kinds of things because you don't want to perturb the base. But since we're already building software agentically in the first place, you can rebase something, pull the core in, and then just reapply your patches again and again and again. So the whole, even SDLC is being rethought in this process. And what that winds up being is like everybody gets a different build potentially that's just slightly different, but still has the like quality as part of the product. And I think that's an interesting challenge for companies that need to do customizations rolling forward. And that's a scale factor too, because it will bite you, right?
You bring this up, Bill and I are going to do an episode in the future about kind of engineering best practices in the age of AI and what still makes sense and what no longer makes sense and why. And I think what you're talking about, and I've heard this idea from others as well, where it's like, it's now cost effective enough to have a per customer code base, whether it shares a bunch or shares a little or whatever, and you avoid the combinatorial explosion of configuration options that drive a lot of complexity into the code base and make it very difficult to reason about. But there are also probably trade-offs on the other side, but it's for the first time actually worthwhile to think through those trade-offs because it's now much more real than it used to be.
Yeah, and I think technically that's true, but with a lot of things in AI, I tend to be the pessimist when it comes to what the ramifications are on the logistics on the human side. Now we have 753 products. We can push them out automatically, and 3 CS people. Oops. There's the human. We are the slow part. We have become the slow part in the whole process, and I think that ultimately it's going to throttle us on many levels.
So let's talk about the last topic, which is now that you've built and scaled, how do you exit? And I think here, what's interesting is, your company has IP. It has some sort of inherent value that's tied to something, some kind of secret sauce, perhaps you, your employees, your team, what have you. When it's you and a bunch of agents, it's what is the acquirer, assuming you're getting acquired, getting? A bunch of API keys, a bunch of prompts, a bunch of processes you've set up, and a bunch of agents. What are they? What's the first and foremost, if you're trying to exit, what is it that they're actually buying from you?
I mean, the short answer is the blood, sweat, and tears and all the pitfalls that you went through or avoided getting to where you're at. And if what you're building is easily verifiable by AI in general, then that's not very much. And therefore, your value cannot be expected to be much. And so, I mean, it's why I chose this particular place. Validating real-time video composited with natural language. It's rather hard. It's a bit paradoxical because the very same things inside the engine need to be done on the outside to verify it. And so even if you can do that effectively, it's insanely expensive and error prone. So to get an automated feedback loop on that is tough. If you're just building a mobile app that tracks your reps or your wads or your steps or whatever, that's not a big moat. Just like if Apple could, remember when the iPhone came out, if they can just suddenly come out with the flashlight app, you're going to be dust the next time they released iOS. And a lot of companies died on the vine that way. So you have to go after hard things, number one. And inherently, hopefully they're hard for AI to just replicate, and they still have some very major human piece to it. And the value derives from how many turns you've done as a human on that. Mm-hmm. And it could be years,
And by the way, I'm obviously not asking this question because that's how I think about it. But
sure.
The reason I ask this question is I wonder, and I'm actually very curious to hear what you've seen. But I wonder how much is impacting like the VC minds or the acquirer mindset. This is just a bunch of clever prompts. We could probably build this in an afternoon, kind of a thing, right? Why would I buy something? Why would I acquire something if it was done with AI? I should I should be able to do it with AI over a weekend. Why would I need to spend the money to acquire it? And I'm curious, one, are you seeing that kind of thinking kind of pop up? And to the point you just made, the answer, of course, as well, is because it's not AI came up with it in an afternoon. The problem was hard enough to solve, and it took enough effort to solve by a human being guiding AI that it is worth acquiring. But I am curious, are you seeing this kind of IP mirage thinking out there? This is not worth as much as it should because it was just done with AI.
Honestly, no, insofar as the VCs I'm still in contact with are investing much further down the line. Mm-hmm. So in that idea, team execution, traction sort of
there's something big enough and real enough already for them to be like, who cares who built this? There's value here. Yeah.
I mean, the AI checks a box, but it's like the team definitely, they invest in people still, not AIs. Certainly the leanness of it, certainly the sort of mojo of the founders, et cetera. But yeah, like I guess I'm so disconnected from that early stage of investing, but I have to think you'd have to have a really compelling use case if you were like like at a seed stage or before revenue, before you could do a priced round, et cetera.
Yeah. The other kind of thing that's related to this is, acqui-hires were a very popular thing to do in the last few years. And I mean, who are you acqui-hiring if it's a solo with a bunch of agents attached?
Well, some acqui-hires I think went for 8-10 billion in the last year. So
small teams, but nonetheless teams, right? There were actual human beings there who got, and not with a lot of traction as far as market or revenue or customer base or whatever. Just great team, can execute on an idea. I'd like to hire them, or I'd like to acquire them. That's probably going to be somewhat diminished with this whole, it's actually just me and a bunch of agents. You're not really buying anything.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to your thing about like taste. So those like $8 or $10 billion acqui-hired solo founders have really strong imperatives. They have really strong histories, and the multiplier effect when they come in to an org and have actually a bunch of people around them again.
Yeah,
it's going to be worth way more than that, or else the deal wouldn't be done.
Assuming they can work with humans again at that point.
That's right. Very true. I mean, you get so used to, yes, this is a great idea from Claude. Imagine the first time you hear, what the hell are you talking about? This is terrible. Yeah.
Good point.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So, and I guess kind of final question around all this is like, in terms of just the exiting, is it still the case that you need to exit and you need to sell, or because you're solo and you're kind of running this thing and it's generating cash flow, and you don't have a big team who's expecting a big exit because that's the only way they really can recognize financial value out of the whole transaction? Do you even need to sell it, or is there just a different, equation going on because your reality is different?
I mean, I think I agree with what you just said. By growing at the rate of the curve you have versus the one they want, right? Because sometimes you're too early, and that can happen, and maybe your curve just needs to go slower, and it may not fit the formulas folks, VCs are used to, and the complexity factor goes up as you have more people involved. Love all the past VCs I've worked with. That's not a dish, but just from a attention unit defense mechanism, like the fewer people are involved in that side in the financing, the more you can focus on building good products. So I think I'm more with what you said. And then it's an arm twisting endeavor, like, we have to raise some capital for growth or whatever. And by that point, it should be on your own terms, and it should be oversubscribed, or else it's probably you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this was a excellent conversation. I think we learned a lot, and we really, really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us today.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Well, if you found this topic or topics like this interesting or relevant to you, LA CTO Forum has lots of opportunities to engage with other CTOs about topics just like this one. If you're interested in learning more, find us on LinkedIn or on the web at lactoforum.org. And until next time, may your deployments be smooth and your tech debt manageable.
And remember, if you can't handle the exception, at least log it properly. We'll catch you next time.